I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. These were the words of Paul written to the Romans in chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Today, we're going to use these verses as a guide, not only to take a deeper look at Paul's life, but also see how it might apply to our own. Let's take the first part. I appeal to you by the mercies of God to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Paul surrendered his life to the gospel of Christ by the mercies of God. In this verse, these mercies refer to how God redeemed humanity through the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ. Paul offered his life in service to God and his kingdom as a thank offering for God's mercies, not as a guilt offering for his own sin. He wasn't trying to atone for his persecution of the Christians in his old life. Paul had a deep understanding of the sacrifice of Christ and what it meant for him personally. A new life, freedom from his guilt, and eternal salvation. When we present our lives as a sacrifice to God out of thankfulness, not guilt, then we can set our minds on what God wants us to do instead of dwelling on the past. As a part of his sacrifice, Paul offered his physical body. His life reads similar to an Indiana Jones movie script. Shipwrecked, tortured, captured, held prisoner, and even stoned. But he also had to endure constant spiritual and emotional attacks. He was mocked, debated, threatened, tried, thrown out of many places, and his apostleship was questioned. But nothing stopped him from sharing the gospel of Christ. When he preached in the synagogues and was rejected by the Jews, he went out into the streets and preached to the Gentiles. When he was chased out of the cities with threats to his life, he went to nearby villages to proclaim the gospel. Paul's life changed dramatically when he became a disciple of Christ. As followers of Christ, are our lives different? What are we presenting as a living sacrifice to God? Let's look at the next line of our verse. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. What a story of transformation we have in Paul. Not only in his conversion on the road to Damascus, from persecuting Christians to planting churches in the name of Christ, but also in the constant renewing of his perspective to the will of God. As a Jew and as a Pharisee, Paul was steeped in the Jewish law his whole life. But when he realized God's will to save all, not just the Jewish people, he spread the gospel far and wide and grew churches in more countries than any other apostle of his time. Paul was confident in his calling to preach the gospel because he was certain of the saving power of God. As he wrote in the first chapter of his letter to the Romans, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile." His inclusion of the Gentiles into Christianity was perhaps shaped by his involvement in the congregation in Antioch, where a multi-ethnic church made up of Jews and Gentiles was founded. Living in community and sharing meals together with this congregation illuminated for Paul the ways in which God was using the gospel to restore the unity of humanity through Christ. Paul was so passionate about his experiences with the Gentiles that he went to Jerusalem to meet with the other apostles and argued their case in what became known as the Jerusalem Council, where it was agreed upon that Gentiles did not have to adhere to the Jewish law to become Christians. Paul understood the importance of not letting human laws or traditions get in the way of salvation. What old teachings, however ingrained in us, do we yet need to let go? Let's finish up with the end of our Romans verse. So that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Paul's goals, his measurement of success, his self-worth, his happiness, and his fulfillment were not impacted by earthly influences. He was rooted in the love of Christ and the power of God's plan of salvation. He knew God was with him and loved him. The words of Jesus recorded in John 16 seem to have specific relevance to Paul's life. In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Through everything that Paul lived through, he never let the circumstances overwhelm him. Where he met obstacles, he sought God's will to get through them. So let's take this message of Paul and reflect on our own lives. After all, as it said in the beginning of our verse, he is appealing to us. If we truly live the life of sacrifice that we see in Paul's, perhaps we can also say, as he did in his letter to Timothy, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith.